All right. I'll let everyone clear out for just a sec. All right. So I'm particularly excited to talk about this one. So for anyone that doesn't know, KEaNU and the upcoming Threshold Network, the first merger between decentralized protocols out there. So we're going to kind of dive into a little bit about how this actually works in practice. So first of all, kind of go through, I'd love to get a little bit more on who you are and the particular project that you're working on and your involvement in, I guess specifically for Viktor, in the merger process.
Well, I'll start with my involvement. So I am a protocol specialist over at Bison Trails. As part of my role, one of the things that we do is work very closely with the protocol communities and teams that we're part of, that we support, and where Bison Trails runs infrastructure. And so I've known Matt and MacLane for a few years, and I've been working with Keep and NuCypher for over that duration of time. And I was very fortunate to be at kind of like the perfect place so that when they first initiated the conversation of, how could this actually look together as one protocol community and one protocol team, I knew both sides equally. It was kind of like Switzerland as the unbiased party, and was able to work with other members of the community, such as Ben Longstaff, to rally and draft and edit and revise the governance proposal that ultimately ended up initiating the decentralized merging process between these two protocols. So it was really an honor to be able to work on it. And because the communities on both sides were so amazing, it was much easier than it otherwise would have been.
Excellent. So MacLane and Matt, how did this come about? How did the conversation kind of start and initiate? MacLane, I'll start with you.
Sure. So first off, hey everybody. My name is MacLane Wilkison. I am one of the co-founders of NuCypher, which is a threshold cryptography network. I guess now I'm one of the leads for one of the client teams of the new Threshold network, which is also a sort of more powerful, more decentralized threshold cryptography network. So we've known Matt and a lot of the Keep team for actually several years now. I think both projects started more or less around early 2017. And we looked very similar at the time. Like, we were focused on something called proxy re-encryption for data privacy and access controls for DApps. They were focused on secure multi-party computation. And then, over the following couple years, I think the projects kind of temporarily diverged. So they were focused very much on TBTC, which is a decentralized Bitcoin bridge to be able to use your Bitcoin on Ethereum and in the DeFi ecosystem. And we were pushing forward our work on proxy re-encryption and working with a lot of DApps to enable privacy. But I think long term, it still was pretty obvious to both of us that there would be, going forward, a lot of overlap between the two networks. I know they were still very interested in access control and data privacy, and we were also looking at, I think for threshold cryptography, asset bridges is one of sort of the very obvious compelling use cases. So if we project forward 5 years, I think the two new networks would have started again to look quite similar. But we always had a lot of respect for the work that they had been doing, and a lot of the community members, just by nature of the sort of similar technology and similar networks between the NuCypher network and the Keep network, a lot of people were involved in both. So we'd have sort of regular discussions with a lot of our core community members, and there had always been this idea a few years ago that people had explored of, what would a crypto M&A or decentralized network merger or acquisition look like? And so it just sort of became kind of obvious to a few people in the community that this would be sort of an interesting thing to explore. So that came up a few times, and then eventually Matt and I and a few other community members were sort of synced up and sort of started to dip our toes in the water and have some early conversations about what that could look like. And that was kind of the initial starting point.
Very cool. What about when Matt? When was this kind of something that came about organically, or was it one thing that was pitched to you? What did you think about that early process?
Yeah. So MacLane kind of put his finger on what I thought was the most interesting about this whole thing, which is normally, if you think of like M&A, you're expecting that boards are meeting, maybe they have some like shared board members, and like there's all these drinks and stuff, and you know, it's kind of like this like shadowy process that slowly becomes public. And this was kind of the decentralized version of that, where instead of you know, a board of directors, we had stakers who were in common. They were like, oh, well, yeah, I stake on both networks, and actually here's what I like about each. And they kind of brought us to the table. I mean, there was drinking, but I think it was a little bit toward the tail end when we were closer to confident this was going to happen. So it was really interesting. Some of the folks that we had in common were, I mean, names that everyone knows, like people like Fimbushi, who just like got involved with both projects and were staking. But a lot of them were individuals who were protocol politicians on both sides and like really outspoken stakers. And then of course we had Viktor in the middle, who was kind of helping like stitch things together and do a little bit of back channeling, which was really helpful. So yeah, it didn't go the way that I mean, I didn't think it would happen at all. Honestly, I'm shocked that we're here, frankly. I'm a competitive person, I think, but we built a community that's very inclusive. And so the idea of like, you know, I have huge respect for the NuCypher team, but the idea of like, why don't we all like, you know, actually join forces kind of shook me up a bit.
Yeah, I think that was something that was amazing about it, is like all of this was happening, all the conversations, all the progress was happening right out in the open in the public. And I'd love to know, like, what was it like kind of engaging the community, and how involved were they with all of these decisions going forward?
I mean, I think the most interesting aspect, or one of the most interesting aspects about this, is that it has been essentially entirely community-driven. So you can go back and you can look through the Discord logs. You can go onto the Keep Governance Forum, the NuCypher Governance Forum, or now the new Threshold Governance Forum, and you can see sort of this iterative step-by-step process, like the initial proposal or the initial idea, you know, which is essentially just like a temperature check to see like how the broader communities for each network reacted to that. And then you can see all the subsequent iterations of the different proposals for like, how do we actually design this process? You know, how do we structure something that is fair and compelling for all the different stakeholders in the network, which actually is pretty complicated because you don't just have shareholders like you have in a typical company. You have token holders, you have LPs and liquidity pools, you have stakers, you have community members who, or you obviously have the core teams that have developed and contribute to the protocol. So there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of community members, or different community members, and sort of coming up with something that aligned all of their interests was fairly difficult. I mean, I think we ended up in a very good place, but it all happened in public. And I think one of the most challenging things was also just, given that this is the first time this has ever happened, there's no precedent for like how to do something like this. So it was very much a process of like the communities working and iterating on this in public. And it was challenging sometimes to kind of explain to sort of the broader communities like what exactly that meant and, you know, how things will work.
Anyone want to build off of that, or covered it pretty well?
No, I mean, I'm still shocked. Sorry, it's kind of all coming together right now. Like, how did we get here? This is incredible. You know, I think some of the things that I found really interesting with the community are both of our communities are different, and it was kind of this opportunity. I mean, I don't know if you guys do this at night, but I'll like look into random crypto communities and like go deep in their chats and go through their forums. Totally normal hobby, and so like kind of doing that in real time, and then how do you negotiate? Like, I mean, you know, let's like call this the basis thing. How do you negotiate with like, in the worst case, a bunch of 4chaners, and in the best case, like a bunch of like really enlightened people who are trying to good faith like work in governance? And so I think what I thought was probably the most interesting was just the difference in communities. How I think on the NuCypher side there were just more people. Like part of that was because staking is so much easier, frankly, on the network today. And so I thought that was really strange, frankly. And then the other piece is that because of the community involvement, like normally if I were negotiating, I'd be very careful about like information leakage and like the game theory, and you know, you couldn't really do that. You can't really do that with a big community discussion. because a lot of people are having the conversation without you. And you can either put your cards on the table and actually sort everything out, or everything can go sideways. So I think we just kind of had this mutual moment where, in addition to the communities, the teams had to kind of look each other in the eye and be like, well, like, trust fall, we'll see. And I don't know if that would have happened if we hadn't had the community pushing the proposals forward.
Excellent. So, Viktor, I want to ask you, how does something like what's going on with KEaNU differ from recently when Polygon acquired Hermes and you kind of had a merger of protocols there? How does that differentiate, and so we can get a full picture of what's going on here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the key differences is how do we think about a merger versus an acquisition? And in the case of an acquisition, like Polygon continues to exist, Hermes as a separate entity with a separate token ceases to exist. And so it really is not a merger of equals or done in a decentralized way. It was done out of the Polygon treasury. And for what it's worth, I think that it was an incredible acquisition. So don't get me wrong, like it was a really good choice by both teams, and they have a lot, they will benefit a lot from working together. But I think here what's different is that it really was a merger in that the original networks, people can continue running them if they would like, and the original tokens will continue to exist if people want to keep using them. But the focus of both teams is to build a net new future together from the same place. And so it's not one having more power over the other. It's really a merger of equals. And there's actually something that we did pretty intentionally that was super key as part of that, which is that we ignored price. And that's really interesting around like the distribution of tokens to each community. Each community got half of the tokens of the new network allocated to their existing token holders. And we were very fortunate to be able to do that because the prices or like the total market caps on networks were like close enough together. But one of the things that we took away is that each network has its strengths, each network has its weaknesses. They were in different stages of development. There were positives and negatives on both sides. But we were able to create this merger of equals that, frankly, I haven't seen anybody do, and I'd be surprised if we saw another one anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's a great overview, and I think I kind of wanted to go into specifically like, and MacLane, you kind of touched on this. Like there is no precedent. This really is like kind of like the first one out there of this. Like what kind of challenges did you come across, and more so like what are some of like the lessons learned? Because this is almost going to be like the playbook going forward if there are going to be other mergers coming down the line.
Yep. I mean, I think it absolutely could be a playbook for networks that are similarly positioned in terms of roughly equal size and want to have essentially like a roughly equal or exactly equal split between the two communities as a go forward. That's obviously difficult because you have to the networks have to be around the same stage of maturity and value and community, and so there has to be a lot of alignment on that front. But I do think we ended up through this sort of iterative process of many different proposals. We ended up at a very good spot. So I do think it is the mechanism that we're using for this merger, this upgrade, is repeatable and generalizable potentially. I think the hardest thing was just that because a couple things. One, everything happened in public, so that just creates some challenges because like some community members are going to be unhappy no matter what. Others are going to be very positive and contributing. So just by virtue of the fact that this was a public community-driven process, that's one challenge. It's very different from how like a merger or an acquisition in the traditional corporate world would work. I think the other challenging issue was just figuring out how to explain this and simplify this in a way that was grokkable by both communities, especially community members that aren't necessarily like reading and following along in Discord or the governance forums every single day. You can't compare it, obviously, like, we're calling it, a lot of people call it a merger, like that's probably the closest comparable, but it is like a new thing. So just sort of figuring out like the terms and the descriptions and how to present this so that people understand it and can grok it and contribute to this to the proposals, I think was quite difficult. And then of course like the design and then implementing all the contracts for the upgrade, because this is the first time, there's no precedence, there's no libraries that we can really use to do this. It just does take a while, the process to actually go from sort of the original proposal to the community iterations of designs and proposals into a final proposal into implementation, and then shortly actual deployment of the new network.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that a little bit, attention, like just zooming in on, a lot of us have some DAO involvement in our spare time, but this has taken at least 3 very detailed proposals that people have had to read and understand, vote. We both have different ways of voting in both our communities. We don't have one way to get consensus across both networks yet. So that's very real. And then all of the messy details where people say like decentralized, and then they just kind of like walk away and they throw that word out. And then you're like, wait, like who's running the forum? And like, then you're like, okay, if we're gonna have a new name, who chooses? And I've never seen a shareholder vote on a name choice. Like you shouldn't do, that doesn't make any sense. You don't wanna poll people on how to come up with a brand. So that's been really interesting. But then another piece here is we did just have to invent an entirely new DAO. And so what we came up with is this like bicameral approach where we try to really cleanly separate what do stakers want and what do token holders want. And we have to be careful, like if either of those groups, it feels too much Keep or too much NuCypher, we actually haven't merged. So it's been pretty tricky. I think where we come out is going to be stronger than what either of us could have achieved. But like it's still a tightrope, I think, until people are using the new token and the new network is running, is we're just having to walk very, very carefully.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like the communication between the two sides. Like, hey, does it feel like one side is winning and one side is not? It's hard to like kind of reconcile that, especially because some people are really bought into whatever project they tend to be following. So it's incredible. It's been able to really kind of coalesce like this far. It's amazing.
People will pop up 3 months after the proposal and be like, wait, we're merging? And this happens like kind of frequently. So like just, and you have to have an answer for those people.
Yeah, exactly. So so we kind of talked about the community. What does this look like from the team perspective? Going forward, is it going to be a collaborative effort building on the same network, or is it going to be focusing on specific applications like you've been working on before, and it's all just kind of all beyond threshold? What does that look like, Matt?
We're both like, this is the hard part. All you, MacLane.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that is sort of TBD. I think one of the interesting things, and actually one of the differences between Threshold Network and at least how I understand the Polygon Hermes acquisition is happening, is that the teams are staying separate. So our development company, Keep's development company, we will both essentially become client teams for Threshold Network. So similar to how like ETH2 has multiple client teams, I think that's probably the closest analog or comparison I can think of right now. In terms of whether one team specializes on some aspect of the network, the other team specializes in another aspect of the network, that's certainly possible. I think a lot of that story is sort of to be written. Obviously, we're both part of this shared community, so there will be some at least some degree of collaboration and coordination that we do around development for the network. I think at least initially, probably the focus for NuCypher, because we created the proxy re-encryption network, that will be an application on Threshold. So initially, I'm sure that we will be more involved in that. And likewise for Keep, their random beacon and their TBTC v2 app, which they've been working on historically, will be also applications on Threshold network. So there's some kind of fairly natural initial division of focus and labor there. I think long term, one of the potentially very interesting aspects of this network merger is that we could potentially have a shared specification and 2 or even more future clients. Have a NuCypher client, a Keep client, and both of those clients could conform to the specification and basically be able, you could choose which client you wanted to run and essentially be able to run nodes for all the different services, whether it's proxy re-encryption, TBTC, or any other future primitives that get introduced to the network.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. So one of the interesting things that Ethereum is the only network that I'm aware of that has multiple client implementations that are in use beyond just kind of like really slivers of percentage of adoption like Bitcoin does, for example. And this is going to be the next one. And one of the cool things here is that when you have multiple clients, typically they only compete on a very small number of features or abilities, such as, for example, if you're an ETH2 client, you're probably going to be competing like, hey, do you get all your attestations in on time, and how good of a job do you do, catching slashings, and so on and so forth. But here, one of the nice things is that the different components, such as proxy re-encryption or TBTC v2, these are modular components. And so you're able to continue adding modules both on the existing clients, and also if you want to make your own, let's say, third or fourth or fifth competitive client, right, then you can focus on some subset of these modular services. And so I'm really excited for what the future of Threshold Network looks like, because it's like really poised to grow as it starts having additional capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream. If at the beginning we can't specialize on just our own applications, we have to have, if you look at Zcash, where they almost have a second client and they have 2 client teams right now, there has to be some sort of shared spec for core consensus. But we've gone to great lengths with the newest network design to make sure, both technically and economically, that if a third party wanted to slide in and create the next bridge or the next privacy application on top here, they could do that, and they don't need buy-in from our client team. They can create their own client or fork one of ours and add it. So, trying to take this concept of threshold cryptography, which to a lot of people, it's totally opaque and they have no idea what that is, but trying to take that idea, which is basically key use and key management securely across many people, decentralizing the stuff that usually you think you have to use a ledger for, and then actually open it up to dApp devs is really powerful. So I think that's the hope between both of us. And I know a lot of our concerns on the Keep side, we really wanted to be able to be a general purpose network and not just a TBTC network, And I think that this is an opportunity with Threshold for us to have more teams and more attention, but also just allow third parties to come in and do the thing.
That's and that's an interesting perspective too. When you think about it, always looking at Keep, there were more applications, but it did kind of get centered in around TBTC. But I mean, there are other people building out what could be private storage networks on top of it, and giving it almost this rebrand in a way, opens up the opportunity for more that's out there. So I think one of the I can't remember how many different token proposals there were. If it was running up to 10 at some point.
I don't either.
It was around 10.
But I thought it was really, really interesting the way it kind of came about. Is you have this, you're enabling both tokens to continue to exist, and I know, Victor, you kind of touched on this. And it's this wrapper contract where then if you wrap up your Keep or your NuCypher, you get a new percentage of T token in proportional to your holdings, and then whatever percentage that you received, whether either on NuCypher or Keep Network. Why was that important to kind of keep that, enable people to users to go back and forth, and how did that come about? Was that through multiple iterations? Was that in the first one? Yeah, I kind of curious, and I know, Victor, you've been hands-on with a lot of the proposals, so if you want to take this one.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that MacLane was making earlier, which is that this is really the first of its kind, and there's no playbook, and so there's a lot of implications for potential regulatory implications or tax implications or community implications, and so when we're thinking about it, but also decentralization applications, right? Which is that you want to do things in a way that doesn't coerce people. You want to give people an option, but at the same time, you want people to be bought into the future and the vision, but also to be able to opt out if they no longer want to participate. And so that's actually one of the nice things about doing the 50-50 split. It's hey, everybody can be a little bit unhappy about one thing or another, but everybody gets a fair shot. And then by doing it so that you can wrap and unwrap, it's hey, if you want to upgrade and be with the rest of the network, you're able to. If you don't want to, that's no problem at all. You can sell your tokens, or you can continue running your existing node. And if there's a sufficient number of people that are running, or that are going to continue to run Keep or NuCypher nodes, and those networks will continue. But we've worked very hard to show that the promise of threshold is something that people should be excited about and should want to upgrade towards. But we're making sure to not force them and to let them opt into it of their own accord.
How clean would it be if every Keep and Nu holder tomorrow just had a new token and they could just move their node over? It would be beautiful. Neither team wants to be, no one wants to do a token issuance. But that's honestly the real issue is more about protecting users. So if you start doing stuff like that and relying on social consensus rather than the code, first there's just sort of a question of what have we been doing in the first place, right? But something I think MacLane especially pushed, which was really helpful, is anything that involves a snapshot or a flag day will wreck users. So either because they're on some centralized exchange and they didn't hear, or something was held somewhere where they couldn't get it, or it's in some smart contract and it wasn't clear who owned it. And so a lot of the hacks that I think a lot of DeFi people would immediately go to are just too dangerous for users. And so we kind of went through all these proposals, and I think what slowly became obvious is this is a network upgrade. And that's, we call it a hard merge, and that comes from hard spoon, which is, not a hard fork. And I'll let you Google that yourself later. And I think what was important there is just focusing on how can we get everyone into the same boat safely. And this was it.
Yeah, it's an opt-in model. And yeah, very much speaks to the fact that both of these networks have left it up to the community to decide whether they want to go there or not. So no, I thought that was really creative in how that went, how you went about that. And I think it's one of those things, if we're writing the playbook forward for future mergers, that's something that's really going to stand out. All right, so we got this far. Matt's still in shock. What's left on the roadmap? What's coming next?
Yeah, so right now, all the smart contracts that are required for this network upgrade, so that means the token contract for T, which is the threshold token, the vending machine contract, so that you can upgrade your NuCypher or your Keep into T, the staking contract for T for threshold, which actually that's probably the hardest one, because it's you have to not only be able to stake T, but we're also grandfathering in all of the existing NuCypher and Keep stakers. And that is very, very complex. So we're in the process of finalizing that implementation right now, and then of course that will be audited. And assuming everything looks good post that audit, we look to get everything deployed and start moving people over fairly shortly.
And then on the community side, what's this thing called again? Where's the Discord? Where's the forum? What's the site? So we've been working with Threshold.network as the domain so far. We've kicked around whether we'll make a change before we go live, but there's also an entire branding process that needs to happen. Right now, if you're stoked, and you're really excited to be a part of this, you're going to struggle to find where the community is. And the answer is NuCypher's Discord, Keep's Discord, and then a third Discord where everyone's slowly migrating. And so I think that's going to be the other part, is even though there's not a flag day on the tech side and it's all going to be opt-in, on the community side, we have to get the word out. And it's very much wait, okay, now, speed up, go. Because we don't want people wasting their time working on these networks when the rest of us have all kind of come together.
Excellent. So yeah, just kind of final thoughts. I want to bring it back. I know some of the applications that are potentially going to launch on TBTC, or on launch on Threshold, TBTC V2 being one of them. How's the progress in that, and how's it looking?
It's great. So we actually kind of Ninja launched the V2 token contract, and we've kept it kind of quiet to people in the know. We haven't even given them an interface to upgrade from V1 to V2 as a nice little alpha style warning, tread carefully. But the bridge is coming together. I'd say the toughest part right now is just audit schedules, frankly. When the market is tight like this, it's good that we have some auditors on retainer, but new products bust through that. And what I'm excited about with V2 is, what we learned with V1 is cool. You can build a thing that's decentralized and the custody is BTC and it's safe and it's censorship resistant, but it's expensive and a pain in the ass to run, as Viktor and Bison Trails customers will tell you. And so building TBTC V2 where we can take advantage of NuCypher style staking, where you just have your asset and you press a button and a notice popped up and you're running the bridge. Really stoked about it.
Awesome. Really, really looking forward to it. I think we're out of time, but this was incredible. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to the next steps. And yeah, if you guys have any more questions for them, I'm sure you can track them down outside. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Wilson.
Thank you.
Thank you.